and welcome to another session of Neighbors and Friends. We're here at the Iowa University Athletic Center, and we're going to be hearing an address by the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, and there's going to be an award ceremony for 5 of the 6 couples who went to court to get equality for everyone. We look forward to this evening, and thank you for joining us. Here from the ACLU?
ACLU, yes. It's a gathering of the board of directors today. We had a meeting this afternoon, and then this event is for supporters of the ACLU of Iowa. And our guest speaker this evening is Anthony Romero. He's the executive director of the ACLU, the National ACLU. So we're honored to have him here, as we are honored to have our supporters here.
And you're having an award dinner tonight, too.
We are, that's right. We have an annual meeting. This is our annual meeting, and it includes the speech by Anthony Romero, and then each year the Louise Noun Award is given out. And this year's recipients of the award are the plaintiffs in the Varnum case, in which the Iowa Supreme Court established marriage equality in the state of Iowa. So we are also honored to have them here with us this evening.
My name's Terry Walker. I'm from Grinnell, and I'm a member of the ACLU of Iowa's Board of Directors, and right now I'm working on their Communications and Outreach Committee. And very excited to be here, both to meet Anthony Romero, who's the director of the National ACLU, and to honor the Louise Noun Award recipients, the couples who kind of worked hard to get the marriage equality decision from the Iowa Supreme Court. So it's a fantastic evening. Thank you very much. I hope you get to meet some of these people.
Hello. You're on the board of directors?
Yeah, on occasion.
On occasion.
Most of the time since 1993, 1994, somewhere. I did 6 years on the national board. Yeah, this is good. This is good having Anthony Romero here, and the Varnum plaintiffs are an incredible addition. And, you know, they do true justice to the state of Iowa. The gay rights issue and gay marriage is the civil rights issue of the 2000s. This is what our kids grew up as their civil rights issue. You know, I grew up when it was you know, the rights of minorities to be able to go vote. Now this is our kids' civil rights issue. Bless their souls, they've won. And with all the folks that are trying to turn them back, there's no turning it back. There's no turning back the past.
That's why I work on this, and we'll continue to work on this, educate the public.
Right. Yeah.
Did you tell us something about your interest in ACLU?
Well, I'm a civil libertarian. I believe in civil rights, and I believe, especially tonight, it's so great that we can honor the Varnum plaintiffs, because they have the right to marry like anyone else does. So it's great. Okay.
I'm David Russell. I teach English at Iowa State, and I'm a member of the ACLU board. And I was never so proud to be an Iowan as when the ruling came down. And it's a great honor to be here with the people who made that case happen. And you must go interview them. There.
We're here with one of the couples that was in the law case. Would you introduce yourself and tell us what your profession is and how the Iowa Supreme Court decision has affected your life?
Sure. My name is Jason Swaggerty Morgan. This is my husband, Chuck Swaggerty Morgan. We have 5 children that we've adopted together. I'm a stay-at-home dad, and Chuck is in sales. And it's affected our family and our relationship all for the better. Now I can have health care because as a stay-at-home dad, I wasn't able to be on his health insurance program before we were married. But now that I'm a spouse, I have health care. Our last 3 children We've been married a year now on the 27th. Our last 3 children we were able to adopt as a married couple, whereas before, the first 2 children we adopted before we got married, we had to jump through a lot more hoops. We had to do 2 adoptions. It cost more. There were so many practical reasons why being married's helped our family.
I don't have anything to add.
I imagine that the kids are happy.
Yeah, our oldest is 5, so they're just learning some of this stuff. He's real excited. He keeps saying, oh, my dad's got married. He's real excited. So yeah.
Well, thank you. We'll hear from you again later in the evening.
Okay,
Thank you. How the Supreme Court decision has affected your life now?
Oh, very much so. The Supreme Court decision has been very significant in our lives. It has been a really exciting year and a half since it happened. It was a real interesting experience leading up to that point. We were not surprised. We really thought that the state Supreme Court would rule unanimously. I really was very pleased with that. It's considered one of the best rulings anywhere in the country by the judges that wrote that. And it has been really a considered milestone. I'm just glad to be a part of that.
It has been just a fantastic experience the last 5 years. And, we have just been so, I think, humbled is the word, by the support we've received not only from friends and family, but from total strangers that have recognized us and wished us well. It's a very moving thing. We're awfully thankful to have been a part of this.
We were one of the people that was very fortunate to be involved with the whole challenge in the first place, and it has just been a very good experience. Wouldn't have missed it for anything.
It has been great. It really has.
Well, as a native Iowan and a former grammar teacher, and a speech teacher, and I am so proud of the Iowa Supreme Court.
Yes.
Because the wording was so careful.
Yes. That and the original ruling by Judge Hanson was also very, very good. Well written, well reasoned, very carefully thought through every step of the way. And we're very fortunate because the Iowa Supreme Court would have had a very hard time overruling his reasoning. He did a good job.
Right, very much so. And I'm like you, I'm a native Iowan. I'm so proud of my state. Very much so. It's a great feeling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's really fun to see how we've changed as a society to be more open to people that are different than us. And I'm very proud to be part of the groups that's supportive of that.
Well, thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Now, I want to say, this is not my first time in Iowa. I was here about 7 years ago. I met some of you the last time I was here. And that trip, I had promised to come and visit each of the state offices, and so I was clocking through them as best as I could. I still have one left. It's Alaska. There's a reason why Puerto Ricans don't live in Alaska. I'm getting there in the summertime. But I confess, the last time I was here, 7 years ago, I thought about this as a flyover state. I'm a New Yorker. I'm a Puerto Rican kid who grew up in the Bronx. Most people back east like me just don't understand what a progressive place really Iowa is. I didn't think about that 7 years ago. But you think about it right now. And I'm here not because it's a flyover state. I'm here because I wanted to be here and I landed here. This is my destination. Tomorrow I go back home. You think about the fact that this is one of the few places where you not only can take a same-sex prom date, but you can have a same-sex wedding and a spouse and a honeymoon in Iowa. You can't do that in New York City. You can't do that in San Francisco. You can't do that in Portland, Maine, but you can do it right here in Iowa City. And all I want to say is that it is a real testament to the remarkable work that you have done for so many years, that this is the landing pad for civil liberties and civil rights and full equality in this state. And we'll talk about that as we honor our great honorees this evening. I also think it says a lot about the fact that we've been at this business for 75 years, that you don't get to that level of breakthrough in a place anywhere, or even in Iowa, without having had the tenacity, the resilience, the willingness to put your nose to the grindstone and push it through. And it's not a victory that came out of nowhere. It's a victory that we have been laboring long and hard as a group and as individuals who for 75 years have tried to demand justice in this state that will now be a beacon for so many other states across the country. Now, I was looking through the newsletter, and as I often do, I want to make sure I know what's on the ground in case I have to talk to a reporter who says what's going on in the state of Iowa, and I have to remind myself what the issues are. And I'm amazed at the breadth of the work that we've done in our local Iowa office. I'm looking at the fella from the newspaper, okay? You should look at the newsletter, right? Everything from making campuses and the streets safe for peace activists like Sally Frank and her husband Elton, making the school library safe for gay penguins. Let's have a round of applause for gay penguins. Protecting a woman's right to choice, also important, or a high school jock's right to uncensored Facebook pages. I mean, this affiliate and you all have been completely unafraid to take on any battle, no matter how large or how seemingly small. Because there are no issues too big to tackle and no issues too small to matter when it comes to issues of justice. Together, we are preserving what the Constitution means, that it's not just a series of documents that some white property group of men signed several hundred years ago, that in those documents are the best of our aspirations. And that when we think about what it means to be an American, and what are we proud of, when you go to a baseball game and you listen to the Star-Spangled Banner, or you say the Pledge of Allegiance at some event, what is it that makes you proud to be an American? And it's not about the balance sheets or the financial assets of this rich country. It's not only about the great marbled capitals that we have in Washington and states all across this country, this beautiful capital you have up here on the hill. What makes you proud is when you think about some core American principles, that we're all equal under the law, that we have the right to due process, that we believe in fairness and justice, that no matter who you are or what you think or what you say, that those rights are protected for each and every one of us, whether we like the thoughts or sentiments or not. And that's what makes this polity so incredibly powerful. That's what makes you proud. That's what makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up when you hear a great singer sing the Star-Spangled Banner. And I think that evocation of what it is that makes you proud to be an American is something that's increasingly being dumped on, being disparaged. When you look at all these Tea Partiers who are dressed up in costumes with Minutemen and unicorn hats, and almost reminds me of the gay parade in the West Village on Halloween. And I say, well, what the hell is going on here, And when they're wrapping themselves in the American flag, that one that I venerate, the one that I value, the values that I hold dear, and you hear the vitriol and the prejudice and bigotry coming from them, you really wonder what is going on in our America. So you have to go back. You have to go back and try to understand it. There was this great historian, Richard Hofstadter, who once identified what he called the paranoid style of American politics. And we remember those practitioners of paranoid politics, from the American Firsters, remember this? The John Birchers, the states' rights crowd, and now the Tea Partiers. And they would be easy to dismiss they would be easy to dismiss and look the other way were it not for the politicians who really pander to their numbers. And rather than lead the country in what is important and what values bind us, they follow the mob. It would be unthinkable in most modern educated democracies in America to have your public spit upon a civil rights icon like John Lewis. Perfectly fine to express your viewpoints against John Lewis. Hold up a sign. Be loud. Get a permit. But to spit upon the man who walked arm in arm with Martin Luther King, and what's more remarkable is the complete silence from both the leadership of the Tea Party and the Republican Party that are missing in action when it comes to disparaging those attacks on some of the best of actors, some of the best of heroes in our history. And I want to say to you that I think that that whatever it's worth, the Tea Party movement is emblematic of what else is going on and going wrong in our democracy. And it's not new. You go back to the time of Richard Nixon, where he rallied people with simplistic bromides defined about the so-called war on crime, the war on drugs, the war on terror, the war on immigrants in Arizona and elsewhere. So I say to you, my friends, that I've come up with a very simple way to connect all those phenomena together. And I call them the war-ons. Not the morons for the press. I want to be clear. I speak quickly. I'm a New Yorker. The war-ons. I'll give you the text. You can just take it from me. So you think back, 1968, Richard Nixon declared the war on crime. It was a type of a dog whistle. You know, the type of nomenclature that you might hear him talk about the war on crime, and most people would just think, okay, well, we don't like crime, safety is important. But to be tough on crime is that type of like dog whistle that only if you're a dog, you can hear it, whereas I can't hear the pitch of the dog whistle. So for white Southerners who are concerned about the changing demographics and the civil rights movement and the Vietnam protests, the war on crime was that dog whistle metaphor where they were being summoned to be contrary to progressive forces in America. It worked. You found Ronald Reagan almost a decade later, adding onto the war on drugs, onto the war on crime. And then you had the war on George Bush, who gave us the war on terror. And over time, these metaphors, these dog whistle metaphors, have changed the way we think about justice and equality in America in such fundamental ways, where even now, members who are purportedly progressive or liberal have begun to also follow the dog whistle. You had Bill Clinton, who interrupted what was a very tight race to fly back to Arizona to oversee the execution of a mentally retarded black man. You had Barack Obama, while he was running for office, he bragged, quote, "I have passed 150 pieces of legislation that toughen penalties for violent criminals," end quote. Obama, as we know, at the Civil Liberties Union, has too often embraced the policies of the Bush War on Terror. And what you find is this, my friends. What you find is the use of all of these efforts, the war on crime, the war on drugs, the war on terror, as a way to pander to a fearful public, where fear-mongering is used as a way to build party coffers and to build party followers. And that is across the political aisle. This war on terror is now the most potent weapon that we've had to confront, one we still confront at the ACLU. It's a war on our basic civil and constitutional rights. And as committed as we think we are, and as energetic as we think we are, and as thoughtful and strategic and tenacious as we think we are, we're losing ground. If you had asked me when I was a law school student, would you imagine in any part of America that an individual will be held without charges or trial and held indefinitely by an American government official? I would have said, if it had been a true false test, false. That doesn't happen in America. Happens in China, happens in Cuba, happens elsewhere. The fact is, we are now debating with the Obama administration about whether or not we should allow a regime of so-called preventive detention, which is indefinite detention without charges or trial, of 48 individuals who the government insists are too dangerous to release, but that they cannot prosecute in any forum under any law. And so what they endeavor to do is to carve out an enormous hole in the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, the right to unreasonable searches and seizures, or the right to due process, and to say, these guys are just so dangerous, but I can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt or before an objective judge or a jury of one's peers or with the confrontation clause, all that babble that was at the heart of our democracy. We're just going to throw that aside for these 48. We're just going to hold them forever. We're not going to convict them. We're not even going to try. We're not even going to give it a whirl. We're just going to hold them. You're just going to have to believe me that these 48 are so bad. And the worry that I have, and that many have, is that 48 individuals now may become several hundred or several thousand later. Because it's not hard to imagine that if you say that 48 individuals who are stationed at Guantanamo and you can't charge with crimes, not hard to imagine that in the future they'll say, well, we have these gang members that we know are very dangerous. We just can't prove it. So we're just going to pick them up. We're going to hold them indefinitely. Or you can imagine we have these members of organized crime that we can't prosecute. We're just going to pick them up. What would Bobby Kennedy say to that? Bobby Kennedy, who spent his whole life trying to go after the organized crime, the mafia. And yet he never thought about rewriting the rules just because he couldn't get a conviction. He threw the book at them. He got them for tax evasion. He got them for fleeing states. Got them for small little crimes. He'd get them for throwing bubble gum on the sidewalk, as he said. He didn't try to change the rules to get a preordained outcome. And yet that is precisely what we're dealing with in the current context on the war on terror, even with the Obama administration. When you look at the confluence of the war on crime, the war on drugs, the war on terror, the result has been a gutting of some of the most basic rights and values of our democracy. The war on crime has basically meant a disenfranchisement of large swaths of the body politic, largely minority. 3 in 10 black men will lose the right to vote at some point in their lives because of the war on drugs and the war on crime. Now, it's not an accident. Frankly, it's been very much an explicit part of public policy. If African American men who had served their time, done their time for the crime, had been allowed to vote, George Bush would never have won his election. And I know that the consequences of disenfranchising vast numbers of minority voters is something that you know quite well here, and that you've won back with Ben and your colleagues, the right of Iowa's felons to vote once they've done their time. But unfortunately, we're not there across the country. Now, a lot of people will tell you that the arrest and incarceration figures that focus on minority males especially are grossly disproportionate because poor and minority communities have more crime. To that we say, untrue. You have to look at the facts. White Americans use drugs at the same rate as minority Americans. And young white people are more likely to sell drugs than minority youth. But 3/4 of those incarcerated on drug charges are Black and Latino. And 4/5 of drug arrests are for simple possession, not sales. 80% of the growth in drug arrests in recent years is for marijuana, not for heroin or cocaine. How do we come to this point? How do we get to the point where we have 2.3 million people in American prisons and jails? It's a program. First, they're harvested by law enforcement officials who focus their entire gun power, their law enforcement power, on minority communities and schools. Then they're warehoused, often in terrible conditions that make it increasingly hard for them to come back and be rehabilitated. And then they're released back into the same communities and neighborhoods that failed them before. Now, I'm not saying that the system is explicitly designed to push minority men back into pre-civil rights status. I'm just saying that if it had been explicitly designed to push minority men back into pre-civil rights status, it could hardly have been more effective. We've done a study recently at the ACLU Racial Justice Project about the school-to-prison pipeline, about how we've begun to deal with our schools as if they were training ground penitentiaries. Where when I was a kid, and I was a loudmouth kid who stood up for myself, and although skinny and scrawny, I had a mouth. And when I would get into a scrap, more than a couple of fights, where I inevitably broke my glasses, now I wear contact lenses so that no one can break my glasses. I would get sent to the principal's office, and maybe I'd get detention. I think once I was suspended, not sure. My mom always intervened. But now, when the same scraps come up in the schools, they call in the cops. So I'll give you the case of one of our clients, 17-year-old Biko Edwards, soccer team player. He was on his way to a science classroom that had a very strict attendance requirement, running in the hallway. The assistant principal for security told him to slow down, walk. He knew if he was going to walk, he was going to miss the bell. So he said, I'm trying to get to my class. The assistant principal for security, which I never had one of those in my high school, then called over a police officer, right? Miss lovely Biko Edwards was slammed into a brick wall, maced by the cop. We're talking an 17-year-old, 11th grader, handcuffed and then taken down, first to the hospital and then charged with 5 charges. And there he entered the criminal justice system. Now, what's remarkable is that that's not just happening in the schools. It's also happening on our streets. We know about racial profiling on the streets, where police officers will stop individuals because they're brown or black. The driving while brown or black phenomenon was one that the ACLU both uncovered and coined. That was work that we did in our Northern California and Maryland offices that began to document that phenomenon nationwide. Now, I have to tell you, if you were to do these random stops or searches or seizures in the Bronx, where I grew up, they would turn up precisely the same results if you did it on Princeton University's campus, where I went to college. The problem is that most of the kids who would have been stopped at Princeton would have had parents who had money to hire lawyers. They would have known how to come down on the dean of students. They would have been able to walk out of that criminal justice problem with very little effect on their future lives. But the problem is that for most of poor and minority communities, you don't have the resources you have of well-resourced families or well-resourced communities. You have to ask yourself, why are we targeting our citizen population, our fellow inhabitants of our communities, in ways that make it increasingly hard for us to live together as one community? So then I ask you, what the hell is going on in Arizona? In Arizona now, we know it is mandatory that a police department would be sued if they don't do this, if for local enforcement officials do not accost individuals whom they have reasonable suspicion to believe are undocumented and ask to see your papers, that police department can be sued. Now, what's remarkable there is not just that it's obviously contrary to the values of fairness and equality. How are you going to know who is undocumented? By looking at them. I'm going to wear a sombrero just like the one that I could borrow from Gil. I'm going to wear a poncho. I'm going to put a bumper sticker on the back of my car and say, "Pull me over, copper, I'm undocumented." Right? Let's see if they actually do what they're supposed to do. How are you going to make those judgment calls without knowing exactly how to draw those lines? But not only is it unfair from a constitutional perspective, not only is it an unreasonable search and seizure, let's think about it as practical members of our communities. It's expensive, someone said. It's also bad law enforcement. No matter how big a police department you build, the best allies for good law enforcement are the local community members. Now, when a local community member is reluctant to call a police officer saying, "I think I see someone breaking into my neighbor's house, so I'm going to call 911 and alert them to it," and I'm going to think twice about it because either I'm undocumented or maybe I look undocumented, the police are not going to get the help of local communities. If I'm not willing to serve as a witness on a trial, if I'm not willing to serve in community watches, that what you've done here is basically gut the most effective partner of law enforcement, which is the trust and faith of the communities you're there to serve. So not only is it unfair and unconstitutional and illegal, which we will argue in our court papers next week, we will file in court next week, it's also ineffective. And that's where you have to wonder, surely they must know that. And yet, why do they pursue a policy and a law that is so clearly ineffective as well as unconstitutional? And I'm struck by the words of John Lewis, where he said, quote, "This nation is still a place of cheap political leaders who build their career on immoral compromises and ally themselves with open forms of political, economic, and social exploitation." We need to understand that when cheap political leaders embrace immoral compromises and ally themselves with open forms of exploitation, they are indeed the ones who are fueling the fire of the Tea Partiers. You find this not just in places like Arizona or New York. You know all too well that this issue plays out here in Iowa. I was struck by the work that you did in Polksville, Iowa, where you worked very hard to help overworked public defenders who have very little choice but to plead out and move on despite the system is not working for their clients. I was struck by the fact that here, rather than arresting affluent slaughterhouse owners accused of hiring undocumented employees, the feds swooped down on poorly paid workers, hauling all 400 of them to jail. That didn't make the national pages of the New York Times. I read about it in our newsletter. I commend you for that effort. You find that politicians also love mandatory minimums. They make them look tough. They make them look as if you have 3 strikes, you're out. And what's the result of that? We have a prison population that's grown from 500,000 in 1980 to 2.3 million today. The incarceration rate for African American males is 6.5 times higher than for white males. In California, we spend $47,000 to house someone in a state jail or penitentiary, whereas tuition and fees at Berkeley cost $30,000. You have to ask yourself, are we properly focusing our resources where they're most needed and where they'll do the most good? And if not, then why are elected officials still so focused on the war on crime, the war on drugs, the war on terror, the war on immigrants? And how does this happen in a well-established democracy with such deep Republican, small r, values? And it happens because we, as a community, are not sufficiently vocal about them. You have the courts at times draw very important lines. I would point out to you that even in the worst of the Bush years, in which I've lived them now, I started the week before 9/11. That was my first day on the job. Post-traumatic stress disorder is what I'm going to file for disability when I quit this job. And even when you look at the fact that in the Bush years, you had the Supreme Court render 4 remarkable blows to the Bush agenda. The Razul case, the Hamdan case, the Boumediene case, the Abdallah case. All these are Supreme Court cases that said that even the decider can't take away detainees' essential rights. That even that 5-4 court, which has given us so many terrible decisions recently, said he went too far. When Obama was elected, I thought he understood this. I thought he would restore us to the moral high ground that he articulated both in the campaign and in his initial statements. It was remarkable when he came into office, he signed 3 executive orders that were nothing less than a civil liberties trifecta. You know, the closure of Guantanamo within a year, which it's been more than a year, but at least it was a goal. The banning of torture, that was a success. Kind of pathetic that we'd have to think of that as a success. The idea that that is to restoring our moral high ground, to ban the use of torture, but still progress is incremental. And ensuring that, in fact, all detainees would be treated humanely. Those 3 executive orders were really quite remarkable. Now you find what the Obama administration argues in court against ACLU cases sound exactly like the same Bush policies with a different rhetoric. So we're in front of the Ninth Circuit on a case where the very same arguments are made against us by the Obama administration that were made by the Bush administration. This is a case of Mr. al-Masri, a German citizen who was picked up in Macedonia, case of mistaken identity, hauled off to Bagram where he was tortured. They figured out they had the wrong guy. They dumped him on the hillside of Albania, and like something out of a James Bond movie, they said, keep walking and don't look back. We tried to bring this case on his behalf. We were not able to get the 4th Circuit or the Supreme Court to take it up. So we went after Jeppesen Data Plan, which is the Boeing subsidiary in California that provides all the flight services for the rendition flights. And there, we're still arguing, we're still in court. There, we're arguing that they should allow us to present our case. Let us call our witnesses. Let us show our evidence. And the Obama administration continues to insist, as did the Bush administration, that even to engage this case would jeopardize national security and state secrets. So they basically want to bar the courthouse doors to a group of people who have been grievously harmed and say, we can't even hear your case because to even allow it to be heard would jeopardize the nation's future. You find that part of the complicitous behavior comes from Congress. They have been cudgeled into sniveling submission. And frankly, you look at the Patriot Act, where they enacted 1 month after the 9/11 attacks. When they found out the president was doing illegal surveillance on American citizens, what did they do? They gave him a get-out-of-free-jail card, like a monopoly, and they passed a law that made it legal retroactively. They clipped their own wings and oversight powers, it's more strum and drum than reality. And you find a Congress that has not understood that it is not the Congress of the president. It is not the party of the president. The Congress is a co-equal branch to the executive. There are 3 co-equal branches of government: the judiciary, the executive, the legislative, all on the same tier, not one as a hand servant of the other. And I don't care if Nancy Pelosi is in the same party as Barack Obama. Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. Harry Reid is the Speaker of the Senate. That body is coterminous of equal power and importance in a system of checks and balances as the executive branch. But somehow, our heads of our 2 houses seem to think it's more important for them to be Democrats in Congress than to be leaders of Congress that are peers to the executive. And that's why you find this inability to hold the executive branch's feet to the fire on so many of these issues. Now, I will say this to you, that I have to be an optimist. For me to get up in the morning and to go to work and to travel the way I do and to care deeply about the work as I do, I think we will make progress. I think that the time is right for us to think about the war on crime, for instance, in the midst of this economic meltdown, where the war on crime and the war on drugs is clearly bankrupting our states and our localities. It is remarkable that someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger is now in alignment with the ACLU. We have even Edwin Meese in a New York Times article saying the ACLU was right about the war on crime and the war on drugs. Why? Because we cannot afford to warehouse individuals in a system that doesn't provide justice. On the war on terror, I'm optimistic because in this country, nothing stays secret. It may take a year or 5 or 10 or 20, but we learn our lessons from the egregious actions of Hoover, that almost 20 years after Hoover was targeting Martin Luther King and focusing extortion on presidents and cabinet members alike, it took us 20 years to get the church committee hearings, to rein that executive abuse in. And the great thing about our democracy is that no matter how much you try to obfuscate the truth or shove it under the rug, it finds a way of coming out. And whether we know the full extent of how the war on terror has compromised us fundamentally when some of the highest levels of government, in a brazen disregard for the law, authorize the violation of law. And even though they may seem that they're now acting with impunity, and they may be traveling the globe and using the bully pulpit to say that they're proud about the waterboarding that they did and proud of the coerced interrogation techniques, they will have their due in the history books. That the one thing we can be confident of in our society is that these issues come out. They get addressed, like justice rolling down like a mighty river, and righteousness like a mighty stream. And sometimes that justice and that righteousness might be dammed up. But with such force, that dam is going to come crashing down. And our job at the Civil Liberties Union, as we celebrate our 75th year here in Iowa and our 90th at the national level, is to make sure that we put all the pressure, all the lever points that we can pull to make sure that that water does indeed run down like justice and righteousness like a muddy stream. And that we will be there for the next 90 years, if it takes 90 years, to break those waters loose. And with your help, and with your enthusiasm, and with your leadership, I look forward to the day when that happens. Thank you very much for having me.
I have the pleasure of talking about the 2010 Louise Noun Award. Louise Noun is kind of our matriarch. She was the president of the Iowa Civil Liberties Union from about the middle 60s to the middle 70s during the critical Tinker years, as we call them. And by the way, the Tinkers will be at the 75th anniversary commemoration along with their lawyer. So that'll be part of the program, so another little plug there. But anyway, Louise Noun passed away in a very dynamic and interesting way. If you know the story, I'll spare you that. Ask me later. But anyway, we decided, with the permission of her family, to name a Louise Noun Civil Liberties Award. We started in 2004. We've given it out every year at this dinner. And this year, we are giving it to some of our most worthy recipients. Little backstory, 1976, just up the road here, a couple of kids from Solon, a 20-year-old named Tracy Borgen and a 24-year-old guy named Ken Bunch. They went down to the Johnson County Courthouse and asked for a marriage license. They didn't get it. Undeterred, they went to Polk County in June of 1976. And this is where the Iowa Civil Liberties Union got involved. And they asked the Polk County clerk to give them a license, and Clark Rasmussen said no. The ACLU of Iowa sued, and we lost. Sorry, it was a long time ago. We didn't appeal, but here we are, more than 30 years later, and a number of couples from around the state agree to work with a wonderful organization named Lambda Legal that we work closely with on a national level. And they agree to be plaintiffs in a challenge to the Defense of Marriage Act here in Iowa. This is the act that says that only one man and one woman can get married in the state of Iowa. We won't recognize any other states and everything. And so, okay, this is Iowa. As progressive as we like to think we are sometimes, this probably isn't the first choice that you would have. But lo and behold, these 12 people, 10 of them with us tonight, they stepped forward at frankly, great personal sacrifice. They were risking the wrath of the people that we now know don't like that idea. They can be rather vocal. And it is just really a unanimous verdict in April of 2009. The ACLU of Iowa and the ACLU National Office worked together, with co-sponsored 2 amicus briefs on that case. The first one that we did at the district court level has become known as the Courage Brief. And the Courage Brief is the brief that talks about the history of Iowa. And we basically were asking the justices of the Supreme Court of Iowa to remember their history, remember their tradition of leading the country and the world. Don't forget, this is the court that found that it was illegal under the Iowa Constitution to have segregated schools 80 years before Brown versus Board of Education. And there's other areas where the court's been progressive and visionary. So we did that amicus brief. The second amicus brief was about rational basis tests. So we talked to Randall about it if you want to learn more about that. But anyway, so the Supreme Court ruled unanimously, sent shockwaves around the world. People in Europe woke up to radio stories talking about how the Iowa Supreme Court had unanimously ruled that same-sex couples could get married under the Iowa Constitution. It was one of the most remarkable days of my life, and I'm honored to announce the honorees tonight. We've got 10 of these, and I don't know if I should just read them off and let you come up, but make sure you get the right one. They all look the same, so all right. We've got Trish and Kate Varnum. I'll just set them up here, who are the namesakes. David and Larry Hope. Yeah, you can help. David Twombly and Larry Hope. Ingrid Evans Olson and Reva Evans Olson. Jason Swaggerty Morgan and Chuck Swaggerty Morgan. And finally, Jean Boborowski and Don Boborowski. And they are given the podium to tell their story and inspire us all.
Hello, we're Jen and Dawn, and together with our two daughters, McKinley and Brianna, we make up the Boborowski family. And we would really like to thank you all for recognizing and honoring the role that we played as plaintiffs in the Varnum v. Brien case. Louise Noun seems to have been a vigilant advocate and pathmaker for civil liberties from which we have all benefited. We're really deeply honored to receive this award. Our family would also like to thank the ACLU of Iowa and its authors for the eloquent and inspiring amicus brief presented in our case. It proudly outlines how Iowa has been among the most innovative and protective states in upholding civil liberties. We greatly appreciate the ACLU for its vital work across our nation, supporting citizens by giving strength and a voice to right injustices. In the words of Molly Ivins, so keep fighting for freedom and justice, beloveds, but don't forget to have fun doing it too. Thank you very much.
I was born in Iowa, and I've lived in Iowa all my life. And on that day when that Supreme Court ruling came down, I was never so proud to be an Iowan in my life. I was raised in a family, small town, southern Iowa, where my brother and I were taught that everyone is a part of society, regardless of color, religion, etc. And I look back now on how fortunate I was to have had parents like that, who were, it's just been unreal. Larry and I both, this has been one of the most incredible trips the last 5 years we've ever had. Never in my wildest imagination did I think I would be doing something like this, but I wouldn't have missed a minute of it. Thank you so much to everyone for what has been accomplished here in Iowa.
I like to mention sometimes that I am an Iowan by choice and not by chance. And it has been an absolutely marvelous experience of our lives. I wouldn't have missed it for anything.
Hi, my name is Jason. This is my husband, Chuck. We have 5 children, which some of you know we go on and on and on about all the time. And we did this for them as much as for ourselves. We do appreciate the pat on the back, the award. It feels good to know that we're appreciated for what we've done. But we want to thank everyone in this room and people at Lambda Legal, One Iowa, everyone with the ACLU for all your hard work. We really appreciate it, and thank you for your recognition.
I'm Ingrid Evans Olson, and this is my wife, Reva Evans Olson. We're both lifelong Iowans. We both were born and raised in Iowa, still choose to live in Iowa, even though we both work in Nebraska. And we see the dichotomy of the situation between the state. We cross the river every day and spend, a third of our life in Nebraska. And in Nebraska, you can be fired for being gay. You can be denied housing for being gay. And obviously there's no gay marriage in Nebraska. So it's just wonderful to be an Iowan because we see every day our friends that live in Nebraska that struggle with issues. They can't adopt. There's no second parent adoption in Nebraska. And so we see how Iowa's led the way for years because we've had the right to adopt children for years. Obviously, Iowa had domestic partner benefits for its employees, state employees for years, and I'm sure the ACLU of Iowa helped in some regard to that. We appreciate the work that you guys did with the briefs, and we appreciate the ongoing work that we know you're going to continue to do, keeping legislators in office that support our families and our life. So thank you for this. We appreciate it.
My name is Kate Varnum, and this is my wife, Trish Varnum. And like David said, I am an Iowan by chance. Not a lifelong Iowan. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but I moved here as soon as I could. I was only 6 months old, so give me a break. My wife is an Iowan by choice. She moved up here for a job and for a love that didn't go so well, but I'm so glad she stayed. I want to thank you for this award. We didn't do it for an award. We didn't do it for publicity. We didn't do it to get our names in the paper or on the news. We did it for our family. And we will continue to do this for our family. And as I've said many other places, I don't ever want to get to a point where our marriage, these marriages, are dissolved by popular vote. And I will do whatever I can to keep that from happening. And I know that the ACLU of Iowa will do the same. And I thank you for that, and I thank you for this award. It means a lot to our family. Thank you.